Hello, my name is Donna Hughes. Welcome to my podcast called We Can and We Must. This is a podcast about creating change. Today's topic is going to be the ongoing revolution in Iran. Across Iran, hundreds of thousands of people are marching in the street. They chanted death to Khamenei, death to the dictator. These were calls for revolution, not reform. These were calls to overthrow the fanatical religious dictatorship that has ruled Iran since 1979. The supreme religious leader of Iran, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, knows he is the target of this rebellion. He calls it sedition, similar to a coup. The uprising is a serious challenge to the Iranian regime. The rulers of Iran were confronted by a deeply enraged population who were willing to continue demonstrating despite life-threatening risks. The regime faced a level of organized resistance it had not expected. Resistance units spread throughout the country have been organizing for this moment for decades. I think that's one of the things that is really being missed in the mainstream media and on podcasts. This is an organized event. It is just not spontaneous. Their goal is to overthrow the mullahs and their Islamic fundamentalism rule and build a secular democratic republic with free elections, rule of law, and an end to the death penalty and equality between men and women. International news sources reported that the uprising was caused by a nationwide economic crisis, inflation, and the collapse of the currency. These dire economic conditions made the people of Iran desperate and filled them with anger. These circumstances gave them the courage to rebel and boldly demonstrate in the streets against the barbarous militias and ruling mullahs. The uprising began in the end of December 2025. At first, hundreds, then thousands of people poured into the streets. The protests quickly spread across the country, eventually to 400 cities and 31 provinces. The crowds were intense and determined. The security forces of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards opened fire on the unarmed protesters. I think it's interesting to think about the term of these security forces, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Their goal is to guard the revolution, to make sure that nothing threatens the theocracy or the rule of the mullahs. They attacked the crowds with heavy military machine guns. They imported Shiite foreign mercenaries from militias they fund for terrorism in Iraq and other countries to kill the protesters. There were many reports of security forces killing wounded people and disposing of bodies so their families cannot find them. The National Council of Resistance of Iran is painstakingly documenting every killing. To date, they have verified more than 3,000 protesters who have been killed. What is unseen in the cell phone videos of the protesters and invisible to the talking heads on podcasts and not discussed on cable news were the organizers. The uprising was not leaderless. The protests were not spontaneous eruptions. The synchrony and complexity of the uprising were organized. The organizers have to stay invisible to avoid regime's guns, prisons, and the hangman's noose. But they were there, directing the uprising. Decentralized resistant units exist throughout the country. They are part of an underground network built up over decades to oppose the inhumane dictatorship controlling the country. The members belong to the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, which has existed for decades. The resistance units formed cells in cities and towns throughout Iran. For years, they organized small protests with retirees who are not receiving their pensions, unpaid workers, and townspeople suffering from a lack of water. They organized youth and women into cells. They engaged in anti-regime graffiti writing. They set public posters with the faces of regime leaders on fire. They threw incendiary devices at police stations and set them on fire. They promoted the Iranian resistance movement by hanging photos of resistance leaders from overpasses and bridges. The women activists lead many of the resistance units. Organized resistance units carry out acts of sabotage. During protests, the resistant units organize and guide the crowds to avoid danger and confrontations with security forces. They also defended protesters from the approaching security forces by setting fires on the street allowing the protesters time to escape. Regional ethnic groups in Iran are also joining the resistance. The organizers have linked the local protests and the diverse groups into a powerful nationwide uprising. The press conferences held by the National Council of Resistance of Iran, the political body of the Iranian resistance, have had a far-reaching impact. Since 2004, NRC in Washington, D.C., has held press conferences to expose the nuclear programs and facilities of the Iranian regime. They have revealed secret nuclear facilities that no other intelligence agency knew about in such detail. Their intelligence gathering has also exposed the plans of the Iranian regime to suppress political protests. At a recent press conference, Deputy Director Ali Risa Jafarzadeh of the NCRI in USA office revealed classified documents and audio recordings from high-level meetings in Tehran. In an audio recording of the top-secret Security Council meeting in Tehran on the 28th of April, 2025, officials discussed plans to prevent an uprising. That's right, they were planning how to prevent an uprising. In this deadly conflict between the oppressive security forces and the pro-democracy activists, it is amusing to me to imagine the officials' response upon hearing their voices from a top-secret meeting being broadcast at an NCRI press conference in Washington, D.C. At the press conference, Suna Samsami, the U.S. representative of the National Council of Resistance, revealed that the killings of the protesters were not the result of isolated excesses, meaning it wasn't just a few of the security forces that got out of control. These killings were the result of deliberate decisions made at the highest levels of power. Evidence of this plan was in a document the Iranian resistance acquired. It's called the Opposition Security Plan 2024, a 129-page plan on how to respond to protests. It was a coordinated plan approved personally by the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. The report revealed that the mass killings were premeditated and coordinated at top-secret meetings. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard had a nationwide suppression plan that constituted crimes against humanity. However, the massacres have only hardened the Iranian people's hearts and resolve. These people are so desperate. There are such economic straits, and they are so angry that the massacres, in fact, while terrifying and they're grief-stricken, but they are angry. They know that the religious dictatorship will not reform. It can only be overthrown. A new wave of anger is growing. Funerals of slain protesters are turning into anti-regime protests. Although the mass protests have ended, the resistance units continue to operate. They have moved into the next phase of the revolution. They are ongoing, peaceful. They include ongoing, peaceful sit-ins and slow marches by small groups. For example, in Shush in southwest Iran, retirees have resumed their protest rallies. The deadly nature of this conflict is illustrated by the possible charges against the estimated 50,000 protesters who were arrested. In previous protests, the people were charged with the crime of moharaba, waging war against God, and several people were executed. The protesters are chanting, "Death to the dictator, death to Khamenei." The Supreme Leader has announced that anyone caught chanting these slogans will be charged with waging war against God. The regime knows this is a fight to the death. In January 2026, Mariam Rajavi, the president-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, said that the revolution is now irreversible, and it will continue until the regime is overthrown. She declared, "The question is no longer whether the regime will fall, but when."